Okay guys, so today we're going to talk about the ecological footprint. This is a little bit of a long lecture, so you might want to stop halfway through or indeed at any point that you want to make notes. Make notes on the PowerPoint, and basically what you're seeing in front of you now is the PowerPoint that is on aisle, or at least the version when I did it. Ecological footprint. I'll let you have a read of the information here on the ecological footprint. The syllabus asks you to evaluate the ecological footprint as a means to measure the relationship between population size and resource consumption. You'll already understand that there is a problem with this statement straight away because there's not a direct relationship between the population size and the amount of resources they use. We already considered this when looking at low-income countries and high-income countries, or LEDCs and MEDCs. So you see here from this side, the ecological footprint has 5 aspects to it, 5 things that it measures. This is from Wiki, so we'll have a look at what it says. So it's really a measure of the demand that human beings place on their environment. This is both the ability for nature to create the resources in the first place that we use, and the ability of nature to clean up the mess that we generate. You remember that Paul Ehrlich, in his interpretation of Malthus's theory, also integrates this idea of damage to our environment. Here we're looking at things like ecological degradation and ecological overshoot. Quite useful to think of the principle here that we use it, we trash it, and we leave Mother Nature to pick up the pieces. So the ecological footprint, I think, is best measured as per capita, that is per person. Much better to look at this rather than the overall footprint of that country, which personally I think doesn't mean so much. Per capita ecological footprint, there we shortened to EF, looks at the amount of land in hectares or earths that each person needs to use to sustain their lifestyle. As you go on, you will see that each person at the moment has about 1.8 hectares, or obviously one share of the Earth's resources. So each person is allowed one Earth. For example, if you use twice your share, so 3.4 hectares, that's 2 Earths that you're using up. Moving on, the footprint is a useful tool, and it can be used to educate people about carrying capacity and about the concept of overconsumption. Now, whether or not you look at ecological footprints in terms of your global responsibility, or so globally each person has available to them 1 Earth or 1.8 hectares, or you do it by country and say each country has so many hectares of land available to it, so that is your share of your country's global footprint. There are different ways to use this and different things that we can do with it. So again, like we said before, your footprint, your share globally that's available to you is 1.8 global hectares. Any more than this and you're using more than your fair share. We'll come back to this problem with dense urban areas such as Hong Kong, because of course we have a very, very small area, so even if we use our 1.8 hectares, you could on paper criticise Hong Kong and saying because you're in such a small area, you have far less than that. There are absolutely huge variations, and you can see from this table here that really per capita becomes more important, per person becomes more important than the total consumption for the country. We can see here that the UAE is at 10.6. Remember, you only get 1.8 each. That compares to Afghanistan, which is 0.11. Anybody who's been to Dubai will understand why they use so many resources, as well as its very wasteful lifestyle, the urban lifestyle spread out over large areas, the mass consumption. We're also constructing all of those buildings there, so that's going to affect the ecological footprint, and it's in a very, very dry area, so most of their water comes from desalination, which uses a huge amount of energy, and also it's very, very hot. Compare this to Afghanistan and the lifestyles they have there, and you can see why there will be those differences. I'd like you to take the footprint test to see how much you as an individual use up. If you go on plane travel, especially intercontinental plane travel or business class or first class, if you're lucky enough, your footprint is going to be absolutely huge. What's interesting here is when we look at the global hectares from 1900, the footprint has increased from 1 to 3.5 in rich countries, but the amount of ecologically productive land has actually decreased from 5.6 to 1.5. So that decrease in ecologically productive land per person has mainly decreased due to population increase, but also we're going to have a bit of environmental degradation and environmental overshoot. So there we go on to look at biocapacity. And remember, the important thing with biocapacity is that it's not a static concept. It can change. Amazing thing here, if we look at these figures, 16% of the world's biocapacity is found in just one country, and that's Brazil. Here the very good example is of Iraq, and there you can see that the biocapacity of Iraq has significantly reduced. That's due to environmental degradation, ecological overshoot if you want to be more specific, and also due to climatic change. This is quite a good map. It's changed the size of the country to show that the amount of biocapacity that is found there. So you can see here in the example, Brazil, here is Brazil. You can see Brazil has 16% of the world's biocapacity. The colours don't mean anything at all, they're just to help us to understand the different continents. You can see the difference now when we start looking at the ecological footprint of the entire country. There you can see that India, with its massive population, has a comparatively small ecological footprint. That's because it's in a state of less economic development. China, you may say, okay, China not as economically developed as the UK, but it has a large footprint. But remember, you've got 1.2 billion people in China. Compare this to the population of the USA, which I'd like you to go onto the internet to find out. You can see that the per person ecological footprint for our dear friends in the United States of America is absolutely huge. Most of that is due to their consumer culture and transportation. So when we look at the numbers more closely, they're actually quite alarming. And you can see here that there's a massive difference. Okay, yes, you could say the USA is doing okay because they've got 2,750 million GH, global hectares for its population of 294. Okay, so on those figures, they're not doing too badly. But if you take their whole global responsibility, you can see that they're using way over their share. Compare that with China, and you can see that China per person only uses 1.5, whereas the USA uses about 9. It appears that the USA is okay if you just look at the figures, because the USA has about 9.3 each, but only uses 9. Of course, globally, you can't really look at those figures in isolation of population. Going on to this map here, you can see the Environmental Sustainability Index, and what we're looking for are the colours here. I'll let you have a look. Countries in the dark green are the most sustainable. The lighter green becomes the least sustainable. So here we can see what's happening to the biocapacity. This is the biocapacity for the United States of America, and you can see that the ecological footprint has gradually been increasing from the 1960s. What's more concerning, though, is that the biocapacity in that time has been decreasing. a lot of that will be due to ecological overshoot. China, perhaps even more alarming, the ecological footprint is rising really, really high. Okay, the biocapacity as yet hasn't reduced that much in comparison. Be careful of those scales, it can be deceptive. But China could very, very soon be pushing itself into a situation where suddenly you go to the ecological overshoot and then the biocapacity will rapidly decrease. As yet, China isn't quite in that position, but there is potential in the future. Vietnam, there you can see again the ecological footprint recently from the 21st century of Vietnam has been increasing rapidly. Its biocapacity, look at the drop in its biocapacity. There's significant ecological overshoot there. So this whole idea of ecological footprints, not so good for microstates and dense urban areas such as New York and Hong Kong. That's because these areas are actually very efficient, but because they're using more than their local fair share, they have got into a lot of criticism. Many critics argue that the farmers actually have a larger ecological footprint due to inefficiencies and large travelling longer distances, and there's no economies of scales in urban environment. This means that the urban counterparts will use far less energy. Some say ecological footprints also ignore the benefits of trade and specialisation. There you've got economies of scales and things are going to be a lot more efficient. When we look at this, the system encourages you to replace your biodiverse crop or a biodiverse ecosystem with a monoculture, because on paper they appear to be more efficient. Therefore, by putting a monoculture in, you're actually increasing on paper the biocapacity. But you know the problems with monoculture, you know that there's going to be problems there. There's going to be problems there with a decrease in your biodiversity. We've talked about that in previous units. The footprint treats nuclear power exactly the same as coal, yet nuclear power produces tiny amounts of carbon dioxide per unit of electricity when compared to coal. So you can see here that the ecological footprint is a good idea, but it's very, very grossly simplified. Please add your questions, if you can, to the Google moderator, and in the lesson we'll address the questions and issues and things that you don't understand or would like to talk about in the lesson. Sorry this one was a little bit long, normally they are a little bit shorter. You can, though, pause me, rewind me and listen to me as many times as you want.